Philomel Cottage. Philomel Cottage was first published in Grand Magazine, November 1924. Goodbye, darling. Goodbye, sweetheart. Alex Martin stood leaning over the small rustic gate, watching the retreating figure of her husband as he walked down the road in the direction of the village. Presently, he turned a bend and was lost to sight, but Alex still stayed in the same position, absent-mindedly smoothing a look of the rich brown hair which had blown across her face, her eyes far away and dreamy. Alex Martin was not beautiful, not even, strictly speaking, pretty. But her face, the face of a woman no longer in her first youth, was irradiated and softened, radiated, and softened until her former colleagues of the old office days would hardly have recognized her. Miss Alex King had been a trim, businesslike young woman, efficient, slightly brusque in manner, obviously capable and matter of fact. Alex had graduated in a hard school. For 15 years, from the age of 18 until she was 33, she had kept herself, and for 7 years of the time an invalid mother, by her work as a shorthand typist. It was a struggle for existence which had hardened the soft lines of her girlish face. True, there had been romance of a kind, Dick Windyford, a fellow clerk. Very much of a woman at heart, Alex had always known without seeming to know that he cared. Outwardly, they had been friends, nothing more. Out of his slender salary, Dick had been hard put to it to provide for the schooling of a younger brother. For the moment, he could not think of marriage. And then suddenly deliverance from daily toil had come to the girl in the most unexpected manner. A distant cousin had died, leaving her money to Alex, a few £1,000, enough to bring in a couple of 100 a year. Right? It's a thick book, Miss Marple's Adventures by Agatha Christie, right? To Alex, it was freedom. It always is, right? It was freedom, the free time to not have to simply work for when you can, but someday it would be wonderful. Anyways, to Alex, it was freedom, life, independence. Now she and Dick need wait no longer. But Dick reacted unexpectedly. He had never directly spoken of his love to Alex. Now he seemed less inclined to do so than ever. He avoided her, became morose and gloomy. Alex was quick to realize the truth. She had become a woman of means. Delicacy and pride stood in the way of Dick's asking her to be his wife. She liked him none the worse for it, and was indeed deliberating as to whether she herself might not take the first step, when for the second time the unexpected descended upon her. She met Gerald Martin at a friend's house. He fell violently in love with her, and within a week they were engaged. Alex, who had always considered herself not the falling in love kind, was swept clean off her feet. Unwittingly, she had found the way to arouse her former lover. Dick Windyford had come to her, stammering with rage and anger. "The man's a perfect stranger to you. You know nothing about him. I know that I love him. How can you know in a week? It doesn't take everyone 11 years to find out that they are in love with a girl," cried Alex angrily. His face went white. "I've cared for you ever since I met you. I thought that you cared also." Alex was truthful. "I thought so too," she admitted, "but that was because I didn't know what love was." Then Dick had burst out again. Prayers entities, even threats against the man who had supplanted him. It was amazing to Alex to see the volcano that existed beneath the reserved exterior of the man she had thought she knew so well. Her thoughts went back to that interview now on this sunny morning as she leant on the gate of the cottage. She had been married a month and she was ideally happy. Ideally happy. Yet in the momentary absence of the husband who was everything to her, a tinge of anxiety invaded her perfect happiness, and the cause of that anxiety was Dick Windyford. 3 times since her marriage she had dreamt the same dream. Not dreamt, dreamed. There is a difference between dreamt and dreamed, and we will clarify that later, but for now, the environment differed, but the main facts were always the same. She saw her husband lying dead and Dick Windyford standing over him, and she knew clearly and distinctly that his was the hand which had dealt the fatal blow. But horrible though that was, there was something more horrible, still horrible, that was on awakening, for in the dream it seemed perfectly natural and inevitable. She, Alex Martin, was glad that her husband was dead. She stretched out grateful hands to the murderer. Sometimes she thanked him. The dream always ended the same way, with herself clasped in Dick Windyford's arms. She had said nothing of this dream to her husband, but secretly it had perturbed her more than she liked to admit. Was it a warning against Dick Windyford? Alex was roused from her thoughts by a sharp ringing of the telephone bell from within the house. She entered the cottage and picked up the receiver. Suddenly she swayed and put out a hand against the wall. Who did you say was speaking? Why, Alex, what's the matter with your voice? I wouldn't have known. It's Dick. Oh, said Alex. Oh, where are you? At the Traveller's Arms. That's the right name, isn't it? Or don't you even know of the existence of your village pub? I'm on my holiday doing a bit of fishing here. Any objection to my looking you two good people up this evening after dinner? No, said Alex sharply, you mustn't come. There was a pause, and then Dick's voice, with a subtle alteration in it, spoke again. I beg your pardon, he said formally. Of course, I won't bother you. Alex broke in hastily. He must think her behavior too extraordinary. It was extraordinary. Her nerves must be all to pieces. I only meant that we were engaged tonight, she explained, trying to make her voice sound as natural as possible. Won't you come to dinner tomorrow night? But Dick evidently noticed the lack of cordiality in her tone. Cordiality in her tone. Thanks very much, he said in the same formal voice, but I may be moving on any time. Depends if a pal of mine turns up or not. Goodbye, Alex. He paused and then added hastily in a different tone, best of luck to you, my dear. Alex hung up the receiver with a feeling of relief. He mustn't come here, she repeated to herself. He mustn't come here. Oh, what a fool I am to imagine myself into a state like this. All the same, I'm glad he's not coming. She caught up with a rustic rush hat from a table and passed out into the garden again, pausing to look up at the name carved over the porch, Philomel Cottage. Philomel Cottage. Isn't it a very fanciful name? She had said to Gerald once before they were married. He had laughed. You little cockney, he had said affectionately, I don't believe you have ever heard a nightingale. I'm glad you haven't. Nightingales should sing only for lovers. We'll hear them together on a summer's evening outside our own home. Again, at the remembrance of how they had indeed heard them, Alex, standing in the doorway of her home, blushed happily. It was Gerald who had found Philomel Cottage. He had come to Alex bursting with excitement. He had found the very spot for them, unique, a gem, the chance of a lifetime. And when Alex had seen it, she too was captivated. It was true that the situation was rather lonely. They were 2 miles from the nearest village, but the cottage itself was so exquisite with its old-world appearance and its solid comfort of bathrooms, hot water system, electric light and telephone that she fell a victim to its charm immediately. And then a hitch occurred. The owner, a rich man who had made it his whim, declined to let it. He would only sell. Gerald Martin, though possessed of a good income, was unable to touch his capital. He could raise at most £1,000. The owner was asking 3. But Alex, who had set her heart on the place, came to the rescue. Her own capital was easily realized, being in bearer bonds. She could contribute half of it to the purchase of the home. So Philomel Cottage became their very own, and never for a minute had Alex regretted the choice. It was true that servants did not appreciate the rural solitude. Indeed, at the moment they had none at all. But Alex, who had been starved of domestic life, thoroughly enjoyed cooking dainty little meals and looking after the house. The garden, which was magnificently stocked with flowers, was attended by an old man from the village who came twice a week. As she rounded the corner of the house, Alex was surprised to see the old gardener in question busy over the flower beds. She was surprised because his days for work were Mondays and Fridays, and today was Wednesday. "Why, George, what are you doing here?" she asked as she came towards him. The old man straightened up with a chuckle, touching the brim of an aged cap. "I thought as how you'd be surprised, ma'am, but it's this way. There be a fete over to Squares on Friday, and I says to myself, neither Mr. Martin nor his good lady won't take it amiss if I comes for once on a Wednesday instead of a Friday. "That's quite all right," said Alex. "I hope you'll enjoy yourself at the fete." "I reckon too," said George simply. "It's a fine thing to be able to eat your fill and know all the time it's not you as is paying for it. Square, alas, has a proper sit-down tea for its tenants." Then I thought too, ma'am, for I might as well see you before she goes away so as to learn your wishes for the boarders. "You've no idea when you'll be back, ma'am, I suppose." "But I'm not going away." George stared. "Ain't you going to London tomorrow?" This is the English that the country folks speak. Oh my God, I'm in the middle of a hurricane. But never mind. So, People's English, the title of one of my favorite books. "Ain't you going to London tomorrow?" "No. What put such an idea into your head?" George jerked his head over his shoulder. "Met Maister down to village yesterday. He told me you was both going away to London tomorrow, and it was uncertain when you would be back again." "Nonsense," said Alex, laughing. "You must have misunderstood him." All the same, she wondered exactly what it could have been that Gerald had said to lead the old man into such a curious mistake. Going to London? She never wanted to go to London again. "I hate London," she said suddenly and harshly. "Ah," said George placidly, "I must have been mistook somehow." And yet he said it plain enough, it seemed to me. "I'm glad you're stopping on here. I don't hold with all this gallivanting about, and I don't think nothing of London. I've never needed to go there. Too many motor cars, that's the trouble nowadays. Mr. Ames, what used to have this house, nice, peaceful sort of gentleman, he was until he bought one of them things. Hadn't had it a month before he put up this cottage for sale. A tidy lot he'd spent on it too. A tidy lot he'd spent on it too, with taps in all the bedrooms and the electric light and all. You'll never see your money back, I says to him. But he says to me, I'll get every penny of £2,000 for this house, and sure enough, he did. He got 3,000, said Alex, smiling. 2,000, repeated George. The sum he was asking was talked of at the time. It really was 3,000, said Alex. Ladies never understand figures, said George, unconvinced. You'll not tell me that Mr. Ames had the face to stand up to you and say 3,000 brazen-like in a loud voice? He didn't say it to me, said Alex. He said it to my husband. George stooped again to his flower bed. The price was 2,000, he said obstinately. Alex did not trouble to argue with him. Moving to one of the farther beds, she began to pick an armful of flowers. As she moved with her fragrant posy towards the house, Alex noticed a small dark green object peeping from between some leaves in one of the beds. She stooped and picked it up, recognizing it for her husband's pocket diary. She opened it, scanning the entries with some amusement. Almost from the beginning of their married life, she had realized that the impulsive and emotional Gerald had the uncharacteristic virtues of neatness and method. He was extremely fussy about meals being punctual and always planned his day ahead with the accuracy of a timetable. Looking through the diary, he was amused to notice the entry on the day of May 14th. Marry Alex, St. Peter's, 2:30. The big silly, murmured Alex to herself, turning the pages. Suddenly she stopped. Wednesday, June 18th. Why, that's today. In the space for that day was written in Gerald's neat, precise hand, 9 p.m. Nothing else. What had Gerald planned to do at 9 p.m.? Alex wondered. She smiled to herself as she realized that had this been a story like those she had so often read, the diary would doubtless have furnished her with some sensational revelation. It would have had in it for certain the name of another woman. She fluttered the back pages idly. There were dates, appointments, cryptic references to business deals, but only one woman's name, her own. Yet she slipped the book into her pocket and went on with her flowers to the house. She was aware of a vague uneasiness. Very interesting.